everything Mark Cox at 971talk.com/Cox.
Well, if you want to talk about a confusing issue, let's talk about what happened with the Supreme Court in SB 5 yesterday. Listen to these three headlines. One headline says, Missouri court knocks down law targeting biased policing. The Missouri Times, Missouri Supreme Court upholds most provisions of municipal court reform law. And, of course, the Post court reform law survives, but no longer targets part of St. Louis County. It can be kind of confusing as to what the court did yesterday. We're joined right now by Eric Schmitt, the treasurer for the state of Missouri. Eric, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you being able to join us today and give us a little insight on this. What exactly did the court do yesterday, and what's still affected by it and what's not?
So back in 2005, when I was in the state Senate, we really came together in a bipartisan way, and you had law enforcement, African-American clergy, conservative groups come together and say, what we see in St. Louis County and across the state is that there are a number of municipalities or cities that are way too dependent on traffic tickets and fines as a source of revenue. In St. Louis County alone, you had 14 municipalities where their single biggest source of revenue were traffic tickets and fines. The most obvious example here, where I grew up in St. Charles Rock Road corridor in North County, was St. Anne. You know, Northwest Plaza used to be the biggest mall in the country before Mall of America. That closed down. Guess what went up? A speed trap on Highway 70.
Yeah.
They went from writing about 1,000 tickets a year to nearly 10,000 tickets a year in just a few years. And so you didn't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out what was going on here. This had a lot to do with revenue generation. And a lot of cities were just, in fact, Mark, they were planning more revenue from traffic tickets and fines the next year in their budgets. And so we came in a bipartisan way and said, you know what, we're going to lower the cap that you can get from traffic tickets and fines from 30% to 20% statewide. But in St. Louis County, where this was much more pronounced, just because a lot of the smaller municipalities in St. Louis County, we're going to have that cap at 12.5%. And then, in addition to that, you can't use your municipal courts as debtor prisons. As a conservative, it is antithetical to our Constitution that you throw people in jail because they missed a court date for a minor traffic offense. And so the people were using these courts as debtor prisons. And so we had a series of reforms, probably the most sweeping municipal reform in the history of the state, that had to do with the cap and those court reforms. What the Supreme Court did is they heard the case and ruled yesterday that basically the vast majority of all those reforms remain, except you can't have a 12.5% cap in St. Louis County that's different than the rest of the state. We, of course, argued that when we were passing the legislation, that you had statistical evidence that the issue was much more pronounced. Unfortunately, apparently, the Attorney General at the time, their office didn't argue that point, but that's kind of what we're left with. So essentially, you still have monumental reform that is meant to end these, what I refer to as taxation by citation offenses by a lot of these predatory cities that were treating people as nothing more than ATMs. So that all remains. You've already started to see a kind of a change of some of the behavior. You're already seeing some of these cities think of ways of consolidating services or sharing services that ultimately would benefit taxpayers. So I think in the grand scheme of things, it's still a victory for taxpayers. It's a victory against these cities that were treating people as ATMs, but instead of 12.5% cap, you now have 20. Now, I'll also mention, Mark, to give it further context, the next year in 2016, what we saw was now that these cities knew they had a lower cap, they started using non-moving violations to generate revenue. Pagedale, for example, started citing people for mismatched blinds and drapes and really started to generate revenue through non-moving violations. So we came back the next year and put that also into the cap. So even though the cap is 20%, when you include all those other things now in the denominator, it's a very significant reform.
Yeah, and Eric, I know exactly what you're talking about, and had a little experience with it with a friend of mine who owned some rental property in North County, and he'd get a fine for having the grass a little bit too high. Somehow the letter got sent to the house instead of to him. He never saw it. Then he gets a ticket. Then he didn't show up in court because he didn't see the ticket. And suddenly the fine is doubled and there's a warrant out for his arrest. I mean, it's things like that draw the attention to the need for some of that reform. It's
ridiculous. And I'll tell you what it does is it erodes the trust in really important institutions of government, principally our courts. And so that's why it was really important for us to come in and, again, in a very bipartisan way to address these issues. And I think ultimately that's why, and by the way, that's why law enforcement was very supportive of this. What we heard from cops was, look, I didn't go to the police academy to write traffic tickets all day long. Right. I want to be fully engaged in community policing. I want to be part of my community. I don't want to be out on Highway 70 with a ticket quota. You also had to amplify this, Mark, in a municipality right off of Highway 70, the mayor of Edmondson actually wrote a letter to the police chief saying, let me remind you that your salaries and your jobs are related to the number of tickets you write every month. We presented that as evidence when this whole thing was moving forward. And it's that kind of abuse. And really, at the heart of it is, it's a big government mentality in some of these cities where they refuse to make the tough decisions that families have to make or state government has to make to trim their budgets, and they just seek more and more revenue, and they were doing it through these traffic tickets and fines, and it was wrong.
Yeah, I wonder because the people who sued over this were some of the smaller municipalities, Normandy, Cool Valley, Velda, Village Hills, Belnor, Pagedale. I could go down the long list, but I don't know how much they had to spend in legal fees as a group to get this to where it went, but now I guess they may view it as a victory because they're going to get an 8%, the potential to raise those fines back up another 8%, correct?
Well, you know what? I think you're on the wrong side of history if you view this as a victory, but I think sadly some people probably do. The other thing that's ironic about this, of course, is you're essentially fleecing your residents and passersby. Then you use taxpayer money to lobby against the reforms. When you lose in the legislature, then you use taxpayer money in our courts. And so at the end of the day, though, I think what we're seeing is more and more people recognize that this is really abusive government. Ultimately, these reforms held by and large were upheld by the Supreme Court. And I think hopefully at the end of the day, we end up with a better governance structure, particularly in St. Louis County. But this wasn't unique to St. Louis County. You had places, Moscow Mills and places like that, or even Max Creek, what the original law was named after, a tiny little town that was a notorious speed trap. There is examples of this all across the state where some cities were getting 30, 40, 50, 60% of their revenue from traffic tickets and fines. There was no real enforcement mechanism. That all was upheld by the court, too. So all in all, I think we're headed towards a better day. Yeah,
that's a good thing. Well, thank you for the explanation. We're talking to Missouri State Treasurer Eric Schmitt because really the headlines on this were very confusing. From the text alerts yesterday, you would have thought the whole thing got thrown out, but that's really not the case at all. So I'm glad that we understand that now.
Yeah, and I appreciate it, Mark. I just think that as a conservative, and I know you are. These are really important issues for us to be able to stand up for people who are being taken advantage of. Because quite frankly, the people who were being victimized by these schemes were the poor. And it was perpetuating cycles of poverty, again, by this big government mentality that they're just seeking more and more revenue. And I just think it's important for all people of goodwill, regardless of your party affiliation, to stand up and say that's wrong. And so I'm proud of the work that we did. I'm glad that a majority of these reforms hold. And like I said, I think taxpayers will be much better off.
And speaking of taxpayers, I brought this up in connection with the law enforcement tax increase that was just voted in the county. And I pointed out that it's now incumbent upon the people that live in these municipalities whose budgets are about to become flush with cash from this new sales tax that's going to come flooding into their cities. It's incumbent upon the taxpayers there to go to these city council meetings and hold their elected officials responsible to make sure that they use that money for what it was intended for. And in this case, it's important to make sure they go to their city council meetings to make sure that if they are going to raise their fine up to 20%, which is the cap, that they have their voices heard and make sure they're not being abused under a system like that.
That's exactly right. And the other thing, too, is, look, if somebody wants to try to convince you or me that the best way to run a railroad here is to have 10 municipalities in a 2-square-mile area, each with their own police force, with their own clerk, with their own court clerk, with their own city council, with their own city attorney, with their own municipal judge, with their own public works director. I mean, I think what you see is a layer upon layer of taxation that ultimately we're going to hit a tipping point. So I think that's right. Encourage people to show up these meetings and demand better and more efficient government. And I think that can be done at the local level in a very powerful way if people show up.
Yeah. Well, I'm about to run out of time here, but are you in favor of some sort of a merger or limitation of the number of municipalities in St. Louis County?
Well, in St. Louis County, I think there's a better way to do it. I don't know what the exact number is, but I think what we've seen now is a number of cities that, for their own desire to continue to exist, find new and innovative ways to get more and more revenue. So
yeah.
Ultimately, it's up to the people, though, in each one of those municipalities that want to demand better. You saw actually in North County, 2 municipalities decided to merge and share those services. I think that's probably a way forward, but ultimately people are going to have to come to that conclusion in their own communities.
Right.
Legally, that's the only way it's going to work.
Well, hopefully a conversation you and I can have for another day. I've run out of time. Missouri State Treasurer Eric Schmitt, thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep, have a great day. Yeah, I want to get him back on the radio and talk about that, because I believe there's probably some of these municipalities that don't need to exist anymore, but who are you going to tell that they have to merge? I don't know how you narrow that down. All right, we'll talk to Annie Fry on some of these budget negotiations in Illinois and some other issues, and your phone calls after this break.
This hour of the Mark Cox Show brought to you by Thomas Helbig, the official St. Louis financial advisor of the Mark Cox Show.
Just outside looking at my Rhino Shield paint job the last couple of days. I'm getting the house prepped for a graduation get-together to celebrate my son's graduation. And, of course, I've got a honey-do list. One of it is making sure the yard looks good, making sure the deck looks good. One thing I don't have to worry about is the paint. They don't have to worry about the paint on the side of the house, because I got Rhino Shield put on 8 years ago. I got a 25-year warranty on it. I'm not going to have to worry about painting the house probably for as long as I live there. Fantastic. Bonds to anything on the outside of your house, just about if you've got aluminum, if you've got stucco, if you've got that cedar shingle siding. It'll bond to that, and it seals it up and protects it from moisture and protects it from the UV rays of the sun. That's what you want. The crew's going to come into your house. It's going to take them about a week. They're going to put a couple of coats of this on. It's beautiful. Let Darren come out to your house, give you an estimate. They got special financing and a summer special savings program. Call them at 877-25-RHINO or 877-25rhino.com.
You suffer with allergies, bad, annoying allergies. You've tried over-the-counter medicine, pills, nasal sprays. You may have even thought about allergy shots. That sounds great, right? Everybody loves needles. And I'm sure you have plenty of time to go to the doctor every week to get those shots. You suffer with allergies, and you think you have to live this way. Well, what if you don't? There is another option, one that has been scientifically proven to be effective, and no needles. What is it? Allergy drops from St. Louis Sinus Center. You don't have to suffer anymore. Simply a drop under your tongue every day. That's it. No needles, no weekly trips to the doctor. Call and set an appointment today with Dr. James Gould at the St. Louis Sinus Center and find out if allergy drops are right for you. Call 314-449-8761. 314-449-8761. That's 314-449-8761.
Don't miss out on amazing Memorial Day holiday tire specials at your local Sears Auto Center and take advantage of our best tire prices. Now through Memorial Day, you can buy 3 tires and get the 4th free on in-stock tires only with the purchase of an installation package. And don't forget to ask about our free oil change offer. See associate for details at your local Sears Auto Center. We put your life in drive. Exclusions may apply. Installation packages include 6-month, 1-year, or lifetime alignment. Offer valid through June 3rd.
It's time to gear up for summer fun. The Ready to Ride sales event is here. Looking to ride the waves? Check out our selection of Sea-Doo watercraft. Want to tear up the trails? Shop our selection of Can-Am ATVs and side-by-sides. Or rev up for open road adventures with the latest Spyder Roadsters. Stop in now and save up to $3,500 on your ultimate warm weather adventure machines. Visit St. Louis Power Sports in Fenton. Offer ends soon. Restrictions may apply. See dealer for details.
Log on and see what you've been hearing at 971talk.com.
St. Louis's FM News Talk.
FM News Talk 97.1. KFTK FM Florissant. KFTK AM East St. Louis. K254CR St. Louis.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lisa Brady. Shockwaves from Washington to Wall Street over the now former FBI Chief James Comey's claim in a memo that President Trump said he hoped the probe of Michael Flynn could be let go the day after Flynn resigned as National Security Advisor. Some Democrats are ramping up calls for impeachment.
No one ought to, in my view, rush to embrace, the most extraordinary remedy that involves the removal of the president from office.
Top House Intelligence Committee Democrat Adam Schiff wants an independent commission to investigate. New York Congressman Peter King criticizing any rush to judgment by fellow Republicans.
I think that they should get more backbone and get more nerve. The fact is, listen, if the president has done something wrong, fine, we should acknowledge it. But right now, there's no evidence of that at all. And I think this is people being afraid of the stampede.
The House Oversight Committee now plans a May 24th hearing asking Comey to testify. President Trump telling Coast Guard Academy grads,
"You can't let the critics and the naysayers get in the way of your dreams."
But the markets are rattled. Right now, the Dow is down 323 points. The NASDAQ dropping over 2%. A gang crackdown in California where one police chief credits sanctuary city policies. Fox's Jessica Rosenthal live in L.A.
At least 21 members of the violent MS-13 gang were arrested in pre-dawn raids of multiple locations. A racketeering indictment listed charges against 44 people, 20 of whom were already in custody in state prison for other crimes. LAPD Chief Charlie Beck says this gang preys on illegal immigrant communities, so making arrests requires immigrant cooperation.
All of that is made possible by the policies of the Los Angeles Police Department and our adjoining agencies that do not check immigration status before talking.